Hey, welcome everybody. We're super glad to see you all here. This is our live webinar for Chaos Corona 9. I am accompanied by Nate and Jake. Give everybody a wave. They'll actually be presenting all the new features to you, and then later on there will be a Q&A, which is where I will give those poor fellows a bit of a rest. So they can rest their voices, and I'll try to handle most of the Q&A, but I'll call upon them if you manage to get me stuck. So we're all excited for you being here. We're all excited that Corona 9 is out. It was released a week ago today. And without any further ado, I will pass it on across.
All right, thanks very much, Tom. I take it you guys can see my screen.
I can.
So we'll get into it. So one of the exciting new features for Corona 9 is Corona Pattern. Pattern enables us to tile 3D geometry onto surfaces as easy as you tile a texture, all without increasing memory consumption. And this enables us to add complex details that will increase the realism of our renders. And it works as if we were tiling a texture, but instead of using bitmaps, Pattern uses rendered geometry. And this means it's only visible at render time, but unlike instancing, no extra memory is used because only the pattern source mesh is loaded. And this means we can have a ton of polys in a scene with little impact on memory use. And Pattern's very straightforward to use. You just add the pattern modifier to the object you want to tile your geometry onto, add your piece of geometry, and straight away you'll see the pattern piece tile across the object's surface. And then it's just a matter of deciding on how much or how little you want to tile the pattern. And over in Cinema 4D, it's the same. You just add pattern from the Corona menu, and then you add it to your base object, choose the UV plane you want to use, and add the geometry. And again, we can use the tiling to increase or decrease the amount of times the pattern node repeats. So similar to how a texture works, the way the pattern is distributed is closely linked to the surface object's UVW mapping. So if it works with a texture, then more than likely it's going to work with pattern. And pattern's really useful for things such as fabrics, jewelry, wicker or rattan furniture, and things such as roof tiles and windows. And we're already seeing pattern being used in some really interesting ways, and we are excited to see what you guys create with it. And next up, we've got Procedural Clouds. So HDRIs do a great job at lighting a scene, but they can be quite limiting as there's not a lot of customization you can do. And the Corona Sky is cool, but you don't always want to have a clear blue sky. So now with Procedural Clouds, we can add clouds to our skies in just one click and create any type of sky we want. And it's as simple as enabling your clouds in the Corona Sky and tweaking the parameters to get the clouds as you like. And over in Cinema 4D, again, it's as simple as enabling your clouds in this Corona Sky. And then down here, you'll find all the parameters, including cirrus clouds and contrails. And all of this is animatable, so this makes animated skies and time lapses a breeze. And because the clouds are linked to the Corona Sky, the time of day is going to affect the color of the clouds, and this can create some really nice effects. And due to how they're calculated and rendered, they have minimal effect on render times compared to full volumetric solutions. Now I'm going to hand over to Nate for some other new features.
There we go. Can you see my screen, everybody?
Yes, we can.
Thank you. All right, cool. So those were some really awesome features, but we got more to present here. What I'm going to be showcasing to you all is chaos scans, because in Corona 9, we've added compatibility for the famed chaos scans. So what are chaos scans? Well, they are a photoreal scan material library. So these are really highly detailed materials that, well, you now have access to. Now, what makes these materials special is the fact that they are photoreal scan materials from actual real world samples. So we take real world samples, we put them in a scanner, and that's what you get then. textures, reflections, and all that kind of gets transferred over into a scanned material. There's a lot to choose from. These can be really great because, again, the point here are details. So these are very highly detailed materials. And there is a great variety of them that you can use in your scenes. And it's as easy as plugging, well, as you know what I mean, plug and play. That's what it is. So how do you use them? Well, let's take a look. First off, you go to the Chaos Scans website. You browse through all the materials that are available there. You find the one you like. You hit the download button. You download a package. You extract that package. In there, you have a .vr scans file. You plug it into your Corona scanned material. And guess what? That's pretty much all that there is to it. At that point, what you ought to do is you ought to apply it to any object in your scene. In this case, we have this really cool, neat foil material that would be otherwise really hard to create from scratch. And we're going to apply it onto the cover, on this car cover here. And that's really all that there is to it. You get these awesome looking materials in your scene real easily, real quickly like that. Now, if you're a 3ds Max user, the procedure is exactly the same. You have that VR scans file. You load it into your Corona scanned material, right? And now you can apply it anywhere you want in your scene. So again, we're going to take a bit of a foil material here, right? And we're going to apply it onto the car cover. And again, that's it. That's how you use the chaos scans. Okay, sorry about that. And there's a great variety of these materials. And what's kind of cool about it is if you are on our premium tier, well, then you get access to chaos scans as part of your subscription. So they're included in your premium tier subscription. And again, there's a lot of variety in these materials, so you can really go to town and get all of these awesome materials into your scenes real quickly. And in a nutshell, those were scans, but I'm not done yet. We still want to present the edge trimming feature. This is a pretty big feature that pertains to chaos scatter, okay? Now, what edge trimming allows you to do is it allows you to really quickly and easily create clean scatter edges. So if you take a look at the example image on the right here, you can see that that grass is protruding through the curb, and that's not what you'd want in most situations, right? And previously, you would have to kerfuffle around a little bit, play around with it to get those edges to kind of match and all that. But with edge trimming in Corona 9 or in the new version of Scatter, you can create those nice, clean edges real quickly. So now let's take a look at how all that works. So we have our little demo scene here. It's a bit of a simple scene, but hopefully, you know, it looks nice visually. And the problem here, again, is obviously the grass is protruding through the curb. We don't want that. So how can we use edge trimming? Well, it's real easy. Just go under Maps, under Chaos Scatter, and then bring in the Chaos Scatter edge trimming map into your node editor. And then what you want to do is you want to plug it into the opacity color slot of your materials. And those are the materials that are applied to the objects that are being scattered. And just by doing that, look at that, you get a nice, clean scatter edge. And it's that simple. It's that easy to use. And well, if you're a C4D user, a Cinema 4D user, well, the procedure is exactly the same. We got that grass protruding through the curb. It's not what we want. So what we're going to do is we're going to go under new shader plugins, and we're going to bring in a scatter edge trimming shader, right? Then we're going to plug it into the opacity color slot of our materials that are applied onto objects we are scattering. And that's really all that needs to be done. As you can see, we got that nice, clean edge now. All right. Okay, so whoopsie, I think I'm spoiling things here a little bit, but I think Jake has a couple of extra features here that he'll present before I showcase what the next slide of mine was.
All right, so hopefully you can see my screen.
Yes, sir, Jake, sir.
Thanks. All right, so Chaos Player is now included with Premium and the 30-day trial. So Player is a image sequence player designed for fast and smooth playback. And it does away with the need to load up heavy video editors, and it allows us to review playback right after our rendering finishes. And it includes collaborative tools to mark up and add text to sequences, and we can carry out basic compositing and color grading before exporting to video format. And another update for Corona 9 is the ability to control the shutter curve for motion blur effects. So now, rather than just having a linear result, you can control the amount of blur at the start, middle, and end of the motion blur. And as you can see, we can get some really nice results from this. Now, this one's only for the C4D users, and it's the ability to render splines in Cinema 4D, which was a highly requested feature. And again, it's back over to you, Nate.
Here we go. Let me just work this UI a little bit here. There we go. Okay, hopefully you see my slides.
That's good.
Cool. Okay, so we already spoiled this. The next feature that I'm going to talk about is out-of-core rendering for textures. This is a pretty cool feature, and what it does is it automatically resizes textures in your scene for you based on how detailed basically they need to be. So let me try to simplify that sentence. If you take a look at those little wooden columns in the background there, right? If you had a 32K texture applied on them, driving the nice little wooden look, right? Well, that would consume a lot of RAM, right? Because it's a huge texture. But as you can see, it's far off in the background, and this isn't that high resolution of an image anyway, right? So you don't really need a 32K texture in the background there. And what out-of-core rendering for textures does is it will automatically resize it down to something that's a little bit more fitting. And in the process, it's going to save you your system memory, your RAM, your random access memory. That's all done automatically for you, although you do need to toggle this feature on. So then here's a bit of an example. Okay, so it's the same scene. And this example image here was rendered without out-of-core rendering for textures being turned on. If you take a look at the lower right corner, you're going to see that it says their peak Corona memory consumption was 4.9 gigabytes, right? Now, if we enable out-of-core rendering for textures, well then, the peak Corona memory consumption is only going to be 3.8 gigabytes, right? And I'm going to go back to the previous image and back to the new one, and hopefully you kind of see that there's no visual differences here, and that's exactly the point, because the idea here is that, you know, if you want to conserve on your system memory by using appropriate texture sizes, well, this feature can really help you out without really affecting the visual quality of your images. So your mileage will vary depending on the scene you're working with. We've measured from 30 to 70% of system memory reduction in certain scenes, okay? But it does depend on the scene. If all you're using is 1K textures everywhere and you're rendering high resolution images, then you're probably not going to get a lot out of it. But if all you're using is 32K textures everywhere, even on that building, far off in the background that you can barely see, it's only 5 pixels tall, well, that's where you're going to see a lot of those savings come to fruition, okay? Now, how do you enable this feature? Because by default, it's off. Well, you just need to go in your respective DCC application under performance settings, and you just need to locate that automated out-of-core textures toggle, and you just toggle it on. And Corona will do the rest automatically. So you don't have to go in and resize those textures on your own. Corona will do that automatically. And that's out-of-core rendering for textures in a nutshell. Next up, we've got new material override options. So a lot of us really, like to use material override, especially in that beginning phase of the production when you're working on your scenes and you're trying to dial in some sort of a cool lighting scenario, right? But you don't want to deal with all the material, so you use a material override. Well, this has been requested in the past, and we've listened to you. We're now adding new material override options so that certain parts of your, or certain channels of your materials don't get overridden, okay? Now let's take a look at these options. So here's a bit of an example scene, okay? So as you can see, we're using a material override. We've got preserved glass materials toggled to on, so all the glass materials are currently not being overridden. But what you don't see is that, well, there should be a nice little sort of shadow play happening on the floor in front of us. That's because we are using a plane which has a material applied to it that has a cutout of a tree, and that cutout is being driven by an opacity map. But because we're using material overrides, that opacity map, that whole material gets overwritten, right? So we don't see any of that lighting coming in. And additionally, if you take a look at that Monstera plant in the top left corner-ish, I guess, you can see that, well, it's kind of looking blocky because its leaves are being driven by an opacity map, right? So with the new material overrides, what you can do is you can locate that preserve opacity toggle, okay? And you just toggle it to on, and look at that, right? All of the opacity channels in all the materials in your scene will get preserved, all right? So this can make working with material overrides a whole lot easier. Here's a full beauty image, if you will, just because we can. Now, if you're a 3ds Max user, the functionality is exactly the same. It's just a different UI, right? You just locate that Corona Material Override Settings button, and you locate the Preserve Opacity toggle, and you toggle it to on. So exactly the same, just a different UI because you're in Max instead of C4D, right? Now, there's an additional toggle, which is called the Preserve Bump toggle. So sometimes you want to see the bump effects, even though you're overriding all the materials in your scene. Well, in that case, just locate the Preserve Bump toggle, toggle it to on, and hopefully the compression is not ruining this for us here, but you can see that now that bump on that fabric in front of us is visible, right? And again, full beauty image, just because we can. Now, if you're a 3ds Max user, the workflow is pretty much identical, save for the different UI, right? You locate that Preserve Bump toggle, you toggle it to on, and there you go. You're preserving all the bump channels of all the materials in your scene, and that makes working with material overrides easier. But now, there's an additional override that we're introducing in Corona 9, and that is the Preserve Slicer Material toggle. So right now, you can see we're slicing through this interior, right? It's looking pretty cool. We're not using any material overrides, but if we were to toggle material overrides to on here, obviously we're also overriding that slicer material, right? And now we can see that slicer geode, that slicer geometry. And that's not what you want, right? So what you can now do is you can just locate that preserve slicer material toggle it to on, and look at that. You've got that slicer doing its magic while everything else is getting overridden, right? And again, if you're a 3ds Max user, same workflow, same thing. Locate that preserve slicer material toggle it to on, and you got that slicer material being preserved. All right, cool. Then what we want to talk about is Chaos Phoenix 5 support. So we already had Chaos Phoenix compatibility in our earlier versions, but with Corona 9, we're now also supporting the newest Chaos Phoenix 5 version. And what's even cooler is that if you're on the premium subscription tier, well then Chaos Phoenix is a part of your subscription then. Okay, just like that. Now, what is Chaos Phoenix? Well, it's a Hollywood grade VFX simulating software. Okay, so you can create effects such as this volcano erupting, right? But we do realize that probably most of our users are Archviz users and product-based users and such, right? So you probably don't want to render volcanoes. So how can this be useful to you? Well, you can create simulations such as, for example, water coming out of a faucet. You can use it in a still image, you can use it in animation. But bottom line is you can use Chaos Phoenix to add realism to your scenes wherever applicable, right? And it's not only water you can simulate, you can also be a CG arsonist. Not that we support arsonism, right? That's bad, but you can light a fire now and such, okay? So that's one additional thing you can do there. And you can also have water coming out of shower heads if you so want to, right? So that's Chaos Phoenix 5. And I'm already spoiling something here, but I think Jake will take it over now.
Thanks very much. All right, well, on to some additional improvements. So first up, we can now use depth of field in cameras with fisheye projection. We've added decal presets. So as most of you already know, Cosmos is full of models, materials, and HDRIs. Well, now we have decal presets, which you're going to find under materials and decals. We have also improved viewport previews for Corona materials and maps in 3ds Max. So when using the high quality viewport, the preview of many of the materials and maps that you can see here have been improved. And just remember that this only applies when using the high quality viewport in 3ds Max. And there is now support for distribution maps in Chaos Scatter for Cinema 4D. So you can now add a bitmap or a procedural noise, for example, to a scatter to control the distribution of the scattered objects. And as with every release, there are lots of bug fixes, smaller improvements, and optimizations. And that is all from me, but I think Nate has some additional improvements.
Very nicely put, Jake. I do have some additional improvements I'd like to present as well. Can you see my screen?
Yes, we can.
Awesome. Thank you. So for the additional improvements, well, ASUS OT, that popular tone mapping operator, is now on by default in every new scene you create. So this is just a bit of a small workflow change here. So that stack, that's how it used to look like in Corona 8. ASUS OT was in there, but it was off by default, and you get this kind of unpleasantly tone mapped image, if you will. If you turn the ASUS OT operator on, well, then the image looked like this. Now, the point is that the stack will look exactly the same, with the exception being that the ASUS OT operator is now going to be turned on for every new scene you create automatically. Okay, so you can start off by looking at a more pleasant image rather than this. All right. Okay. Because we showed the Cinema 4D's UI, it's the same thing in 3ds Max. So ASUS OT was off by default in 8. In Corona 9, it's turned on by default. Okay, next up, we've got Corona converter improvements. So there's improvements to the converter in the way that metal and refractive materials are handled. Then we've also added a randomize by decals into the UVW randomizer, which gives you the ability to randomize mapping via decals. So you just need to locate that randomize by decal button, right? And then we've also, kind of spent a little bit more time polishing other parts of Corona. For example, we've fixed or updated the error window. It now has improved performance, better text clipping, and more. And maybe just something that I probably forgot to mention, I think the randomized by decal option is also available in Cinema 4D as well as 3ds Max, right? Just want to make that super clear. Okay, next up, I think Tom will take over for the Q&A session.
Let me just get there we go. Webcam is fired up. Thank you guys for running us through all of that. And I have a few questions that people have typed in already, and you are welcome to type in some more. And I'll go through those. I'll also give you a quick reminder that we have, these are obviously not tutorials here, but do check out our YouTube channel. We've already released quite a few tutorials for Corona 9. And of course, we'll have more to follow. So let's go through the questions. When are parallax textures coming to Corona for Cinema 4D? Well, first of all, let's be clear, there are no parallax textures in 3ds Max either. There are no plans at the minute. You can always check our roadmaps for our future plans, and if there's something that's not on there, do please head to our forum. We have feature request sections there, one under the Max section, one under the Cinema 4D section. So if you're not seeing something that you'd like to see, do please let us know, because that's where the developers will see it. And we do read and assess every request. I'm not saying we will act on every request, but we will definitely have a look at every request that comes in. So do let us know over there that you'd like to see, say, parallax textures. What if you have a scattered plant with an opacity map already in it? This is for edge trimming. There's a slot for combining the opacities, for taking an additional existing opacity and combining it with the edge trimming map. Where does the edge trimming map get its information on where to trim? Does it work like a distance map from selected geometry? Second, does it work like a distance map? No. The information of where to trim is exactly the same as the scatter. So it's your scatter on object of objects with your includes and your excludes. Now, bear in mind how it works. If you were to scatter individual grass blades, then edge trimming will make no difference. What edge trimming does is when you're scattering groups or clusters, because normally you would scatter a clump of grass blades, and then what the edge trimming is doing is looking for individual instances inside that clump that are outside of the usual scatter positions, and then it's making those invisible. So it's not like a distance map. It is not acting like a slicer, which is good, because otherwise you'd end up with half a rock or half a flower as it was cut in half. Again, there will be a tutorial that goes through it all, but you can think of it as just kind of an extra step. Once it's scattered a clump, it will double check if there's anything inside that clump or group that should actually be hidden because it's exceeded the bounds of the scatter on objects and the include exclude objects that you may have added. Okay, questions are coming in thick and fast, so I'll have to, those are the ones that came in prior to our Q&A, so let me just expand my window a little bit more. Why are some assets of V-Ray Cosmos and Corona Cosmos different? It's simply because we have to make sure that the materials work well in both engines. That's a process that involves some Q&A, some testing, some editing, and that means you may find some assets available in V-Ray that aren't available in Corona yet, or ones that are available in Corona that aren't available in V-Ray yet. Ultimately, once the materials are working well in both, they will appear in both. Where could I find this video? The information will be sent out after the video, the recording is made available. If you registered, and I imagine you did because you're here, we'll email you to let you know. It'll also be on the webpage. We have our learning section where all the past webinars are linked. Will it be possible to make dark rain clouds or only normal clouds available for now? Yeah, whether they're dark or light really depends on the intensity of the sun, but based on the way you're asking the question, I'd say the answer is only normal clouds are available for now. No question, just a big thank you for the awesome work. Thank you, that's very kind. Any plan to create a proper backplate material? I'm guessing that's for C4D. Again, there's nothing on the plans right now. Again, we welcome your input on what that would look like, what it should do in our feature requests section. Corona Converter at times doesn't handle non-metallic objects correctly, makes them metallic instead of non-metallic. That should be improved in this version. I'm not saying it's been resolved totally, but it should definitely do that. You know, making a non-metallic into something metal, that should happen a lot less often. We do welcome, if you have a material, or that still happens, we would welcome seeing it. You could raise a ticket to send us a scene with just that material in it, because I'm going to assume it's a material you can share publicly. If it is, you can just drop it on the forum, but if not, you can send a ticket with the scene for our bug testing only, and we can have a look at why that one material slips through the cracks and still comes out metallic. But yes, you should see improvements in that with Corona 9. Tried adding music to a video in Chaos, that I was editing in Chaos Player, but it didn't work. I'm afraid I won't be able to answer that question. We'd need the Chaos Player team here. Although we know of its functionality and what it does, and we've put it to the test in a limited form, we haven't sort of dived in deep. So probably good idea to send in a ticket using the same system you would for Corona, and the support team will get that over to the Chaos Player folks, and they'll be able to answer your question as to whether we can use Chaos Player to fully edit videos for animations. Sorry, I don't have the answer right on hand. And any plans for the physical material to be supported by Unreal 5 soon? That would be down to Unreal, whether they want to write some sort of conversion for it or a third party. It's not something we are working on. Can you send me the link of the YouTube channel? We probably can, but it's just simply, youtube.com corona-renderer should get you there. And I think someone can paste that to you in chat. Looks like Jake's already done it for some of the ways. Have you already done that, Jake? Have you taken care of that with that direct?
I've done that, so like and subscribe.
Yes, that's it. When using procedural clouds, oh God, very possible. Not in a minute. Not just from the clouds themselves. It might be possible if you were to combine them with standard, 3D volume materials. I didn't have any luck with that though. I did try it out and didn't seem to get any results. So based on that, for now, I'll say no. So I've only done limited testing, but I don't want to disappoint you and say yes. I'm just going to go with my experience and say no, probably not possible just yet. Again, we welcome your feedback on the forums. If you could treat that as a feature request or just as a report. We do have some, we call them playgrounds. It's little threads where you can share your results. So we have one for clouds, one for pattern, and you can post comments in there as to things you'd like to see with that particular feature. For edge trimming mode, if there is a multi-map object, then do we have to apply the edge trimming map to each one of the maps? So as I understand it, yes, you would have to do that. I will add that there are plans in the future to make the edge trimming easier to use. We haven't finalized what that will look like. A checkbox or a button that will automatically go through and apply the material, the map to all the materials. But we are looking into what kind of a workflow and UI would make that intuitive and easy. So do expect to see improvements to that in Corona 10. Are you planning to expand on post-processing tools for composition, maybe masks or something like that? We're always considering that kind of a thing. I don't think we have anything specific on the roadmap. I'd have to look. I know there are particular requests for the CryptoMat, and I can't remember whether those were already on the roadmap for 10 or not. But I think it's like biomaterial ID is the big thing that would be useful for CryptoMat. If there are other masks and similar that you'd like, again, if I can ask you to head to the forums, feature requests, it's how we know what people want to see. I've caught up on your questions, unless somebody types a new one. We'll give you all a second. Oh, look at that. Okay, you guys thought about making UV randomizer a more general approach. I think the answer, it's a very long question. It's basically about whether we have to plug the same map into various different places. Yeah, we are considering various ways of simplifying the shader tree and the use of things like the randomizer. I can't say if that's going to be in 10 or not, but it's something that we are aware of. It would be nice to be able to make use of these things more easily rather than having to duplicate and repeat quite so often. Question outside the topic, GPU. I don't know why that's a question. GPU? I guess you mean, is there any plans for GPU rendering? No, no plans for GPU rendering. Master style for the UVW randomizer. Yeah, that's the kind of thing that we're thinking of. As I say, I can't tell you when that might show up, but we are looking into ways. There's a couple of other things similar to the UVW randomizer, but it would be super useful to have, one location and you adjust it and it's actually controlling lots of things rather than have to. You can do it right now by setting up in Max with linear float things, but it's very tedious. So we are looking at ways where that could be better. Does the new geometry material use less RAM than other geometry tiling? I can't compare it to other methods like Railclone. It definitely uses less memory than instancing, assuming we're talking about Corona pattern here. The question being, does the new geometry material use less RAM than other geometry tiling methods? So if you use pattern, it's less RAM than scatter. It's probably less RAM than any inbuilt sort of array functionality. I can't compare it to third-party tools. Well, my voice is not clear. No, I'm actually quite ill at the minute. I have a very bad cold, and so I'm probably extra super bunged up. Does the Corona pattern can it also be used with splines? Actually, I'm not sure off the top of my head. Either of you guys know, I've never tried patterning splines. No, I don't think we know. Sorry.
It's not something I've actually tried. I know with the jewelry, like it's possible, whether that's a spline or that's geometry, I'm not sure off the top of my head.
I think you can pattern onto splines, but I'm not sure whether you could use splines as the thing you're patterning on, though. What do you think about common point? Not exactly top of it. Common point are a word I can't say in a public thing. Awesome. They are absolutely amazing. I love the common point guys. I love what they've released so far. I love the plans for what they have coming up. So that may be off topic, but let me just say that they're great, and we intend to support them in whatever way we can here on the Corona side, and I think the Chaos side in general. Any updates in the Corona material that will take place other than Corona, Cosmos, or V-Ray scanned materials? I'm not sure if that means libraries. The Corona material library itself will merge into Cosmos, and there are plans to keep that growing, whether it's part of Cosmos or separately. We do plan to keep increasing the number of pre-made materials in the library. Yeah, we do still have some work going on that. So even if it gets merged into Cosmos, we'll still be planning on creating some new Corona materials. As I say, whether they're still in the separate material library or even after it's merged into Cosmos. Yeah, we have an awesome guy who works on those and is still working on creating some really cool stuff. So expect to see that as we go forward. Pattern on curtains, so the opacity of the material is driven by actual geometry. Would this be a bad idea performance-wise? Memory-wise, it would be a good idea. Render time-wise, hard to say. Obviously, when you have actual geometry, the calculations done by the engine could be a bit more complex. I would basically say test it in your particular scene, do a before and after comparison. I do think you would get extra realism, but it would depend on how close you are to the curtain. I think from a distance, the benefit would be minimal in terms of how it looks. Probably minimal in terms of memory as well. But if you have a tall close to the curtain and the actual weave and holes in the fabric would be expected to be visible in that range, yeah, you could see a benefit from using pattern. But yeah, it might render somewhat slower. So I'd give it a go in your particular scene. For how scatter edge trimming works, yeah, the best thing I could say is we'll have a tutorial out and walk you through that in detail. It is basically you apply the edge trimming map. Are they called maps in C4D? I know I always get mixed up between C4D and maps. I'm terribly sorry. I switch back and forth between them so often.
It's shaders.
It's a shader, yeah. So you just plug the edge trimming opacity shader into the opacity slot of your material. And that's how you activate the edge trimming in C4D. I have an RTX 3060 is the way to use more GPU in Corona. No, I mean, the GPU only comes into play with if you're using NVIDIA AI denoising. Otherwise, the GPU has no effect on Corona in terms of render times. It will have an effect on your smoothness of your viewport in the host DCC, of course, but no effect on Corona and no plans to have GPU involved at all in rendering. Will there be a feature to customize how much the texture will be downsampled with the automatic downsampling? No, not each individual texture. You can control how much space to use on disk. So you can tell the out-of-core texture to you know, if you wanted to limit how much space they have on disks, let's say your hard drive space is limited, you can control it in terms of telling it how much space to use, but it'll downsample very intelligently to make sure that you see zero visual difference, so there'll be no loss in quality, while maximizing your memory gain. You know, it's that 16K texture you've applied to a wall that is 3 pixels wide in the back of your image. It'll super downsample that, and you won't see any change in the final image. But I mean, if you've got a 16K texture on a wall in a 16K image and it's right in the foreground, it'll either won't downsample it at all or by just a tiny amount. So it's we haven't found any visual difference in all our tests. So you shouldn't need to get into controlling the individual downsampling of each texture. Just telling it how much room to use in your hard drive will be the only control you need, we believe. If that turns out to be, if you turn out to have a different idea, let us know in the feature requests. Any plans to optimize change Corona proxy to work similar to V-Ray proxies to save CPU resources? You'd have to ask the devs on that one. I don't know the differences between how Corona and V-Ray proxies currently work, and on whether there is any sort of clever change we can do to make Corona proxy more efficient. So it would be the same as, you know, some of my answers. Check the roadmap, see if there's anything on there that applies, and if not, head to the forums, pop in a little feature request. Vantage for Corona? Don't know. That's looking too far ahead. I can neither confirm nor deny that there are any plans regarding Vantage and Corona. Sometimes the multi-cell object, if there is a self-illuminating material, the light mix takes that object also into consideration, other than lights. Is this normal? I believe it is. Sorry, but I think it's a limitation of the way light mix works at present. If your self-illuminating material is in a multi-sub object, it's just going to mix in with everything else, and you can't separate it. At the risk of sounding like a broken record, you know, feature requests, head on over, describe your issue, and say, I would like to see that improved, please. Whew, those are some good questions, and I'm glad you've covered a range from, you know, the stuff specifically in 9, but also a bunch of other things as well. That's thanks, guys and gals, for sending in those questions. Will there be a feature to customize? Oh no, sorry, I'm trying to scroll, but for some reason I've scrolled backwards. I've gone back in time. Brilliant. Knight, Jake, anything you two would like to add at this point?
Thanks for coming.
Yeah, I also like to thank to everyone for all these awesome questions and for being excited about the Corona 9 release. And I saw well, it was a question, I think, but somebody thanked us three, but I would also like to include Theodora into this for organizing everything, for making sure everything is on time and all that. So thank you, Theodora, as well. And thank you all for joining. Thank you all for all these amazing questions.
This is cool. From the time Jake switched to Karuna, I have also done the same. I am a great follower of Jake. That's what you call an influencer. Awesome. Well, it looks like we've got all the questions. And of course, we are always here. You can always ask us questions on the forum. You can always send in a ticket, which will reach our customer excellence team or our support team. You generally know where to find us on YouTube and all the social media. We always welcome your questions. It's not just during webinars. So if there's anything you think of later, oh, wish I'd asked that, get in touch. Ask a question. It's your feedback, including your questions, that kind of help us decide which direction Karuna should go in. So excellent. And yeah, my thanks to Theodora too, because that lets us sit here and talk and present and waffle on, and she takes care of all the technical stuff, and we don't have to think about it. So that's really cool. And I think on that note, we are done. We'll give you all a good farewell wave.
Thank you, everybody.
Cheers.
Thanks, everybody.